Happy New Year, everyone, and welcome to the Happiness Journey with Dr. Dan podcast, where every journey is worth living. My name is Dr. Dan. I'm your host for today's episode. I'm a bilingual neurolinguistic programming and cognitive behavior psychotherapist specializing in anger management issues, both court appointed and private, marriage counseling using the EFT method, dissociative disorders, narcissistic personality disorders, depression, anxiety, dream analysis, and also provide life, business, and retirement coaching support. I provide individual one-on-one session in French or English and also do group settings. If you need any assistance, reach out to DMV Therapy and Coaching Services at 301-325-1550, and our website can be found at lifecoachdanamsalive.com. Today, I'm very excited to have for our second episode of season 14, a special guest, author of Synchronicity of Love, teacher and everyday mystic, John David Latta. And just like every day of my past episode, I will leave it up to the guests to properly introduce themselves, as no one can do a better job. John, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Dan. I appreciate the invitation for being here. Well, I think you did a really nice job at introducing me. I don't really know what to add to that. You're right. I wrote a book, in the middle of last year, and I've been out trying to promote it now. I live in Redmond, Washington, with my wife, Wendy, just outside of Seattle. And I'm here with you on your show, and we're going to talk about the synchronicity of love.
Beautiful. Well, thank you so much for accepting the invitation here. I know we had I would say, a very quick conversation in 2022 and about what we would like to be able to cover in this podcast. So today, what I would like to do, it's not going to be anything prepared or anything. No, you didn't send me any question to ask you. I just want to let the listeners know that this is going to just be flowing normally and naturally. So tell me first, why did you feel the need to write this book? Did anything happen in your life that prompted you to be able to share your own personal experience?
Sure. Yeah. So 20 years ago, approximately, everything that could go wrong all went wrong with my life at the same time, like everything. My wife got cancer. It came completely out of left field, entirely unexpected. She was healthy, took good care of herself. 2 weeks after the diagnosis, they took out her entire thyroid gland, and she has to take a pill every day just to live for the rest of her life. And she started to change as a result of that. She started to take a look at her own life and what she wanted out of life. She started reading books about God and the meaning of life. I think this happens to a lot of people that get cancer. They kind of go through an internal life review. And at the same time, I'd left my very secure job and started my own company and promptly lost all of our money and a whole bunch more. And we were $650,000 in debt. And then on top of that, I don't know where it came from, but suddenly I was terrified of death. I don't know where it came from or why, but suddenly the specter of death just terrified me. I'd not been religious, I'd not been spiritual or anything like that. So I didn't even know who to talk to about this fear I had. And I kept perceiving death as oblivion. Like when I die, I'll be gone forever. And it just terrified me. And so this was all going on at the same time. And then suddenly my wife just ups and leaves and says, I want a whole new life. I'm leaving. You take the kids. You're the better parent. See you later. Goodbye. And suddenly I have custody of my two children who are ages 9 and 11. And feeling like a bad husband, a bad father, a bad businessman, and a grown man who's terrified of death. But weirdly, that began all the greatest things that ever happened in my whole life, and just kind of hitting my own sort of personal rock bottom. And I broke down. I went to my first ever spiritual retreat, something I'd never done before, and which was a big, bold, brave move on my part. It was sort of like being a Nazi skinhead and deciding I was going to go move in with my black neighbors across the street. It was that difficult for me. But everything in my life started to change almost the minute I signed up for it. The word synchronicity really means like coincidence or miracles. Mm-hmm. Things started to happen that I didn't think were possible and that I wasn't really making happen. And they were beautiful and amazing things. And I heard, in your long list of accomplishments and all the things you do personally and professionally, I heard you talk about dream work. Well, about a year after that, I started having profound dreams, night after night after night. And then a year after that, had a full-on encounter with what most people would call Kundalini energy, and this tremendous energy coursing through my body for months and years afterwards. And so what prompted me to write the book was the next 20 years of my life, ever since I hit my own personal rock bottom, I share a lot of personal, true, and mostly true stories that have happened to me that feel like synchronicity. And it's kind of an amazing thing when it happens to you. It's sort of like life's looking out after you. Life's making things easier for you. Life's rolling out a red carpet for you. And so I was trying to explore all the experiences that happened to me that started all the way back when I hit my personal rock bottom. And so one of the messages I like to bring to people is sometimes that rock bottom can be the very best thing that ever happened to you. But you never know it when you're in it. When you're in it, it feels horrible.
So by believing in synchronicity, do you feel that coincidence do not exist?
Well, probably on some deep level, coincidences don't exist. And I've heard some people say that these coincidences, these synchronicities, sometimes people use the word miracle or serendipity, they're actually happening all the time, but we don't see it. Now, that's possible, but for me, a lot of things started happening that I didn't think were possible and I never saw before. It sounds like a silly thing, but the minute I signed up for the retreat, which I had signed up at the last minute, so I was one of the last people to sign up, caught a flight from Seattle down to Southern California because the retreat was in the mountains in Southern California. And as the plane is touching down, the woman next to me is reading the retreat leader's book.
Okay.
And the only two people, I counted about 180 people on the flight, the only two people going to the retreat are me and her. And what are the chances we'd be seated side by side? What are the chances she'd be reading his book just as I look over into her lap and see her reading?
Unbelievable.
And the funny thing was she was just as nervous about going as I was. And we had a big laugh about it, which made it so much easier. It's like, well, you look normal. Well, you look normal too. Okay, I guess this is going to be okay. And
Yes.
so those sort of little, some people I think might call them signs, and they're magical. And when they're happening, it's a beautiful thing. And it's like, wow, what have I been missing all this time?
Yes, yes. So in this retreat, what did you learn that kind of brought you to become the person that you are today, John?
Yeah. I also saw in your list of accomplishments, and I was on your website. I see you do a lot of relationship work and learning to listen better. I know it sounds crazy. I go to this really amazing, elaborate spiritual retreat out in the desert for 10 days, completely cut off from the world, no cell phones, no email, nothing. And the thing I learned was I hadn't realized how much I kept people at a distance. It was the first time I had an experience of being vulnerable and truly intimate with other people. And I loved it and I craved it. And I tried to bring it home with me. And, you might say, I took off my mask, you might say.
Oh,
I
okay.
stopped trying to pretend to be something I wasn't. I tried to admit how really hurt I felt about everything that was happening to me. And so I didn't have a lot of crazy spiritual experiences. Those came later. But the first thing I discovered was how to be open, honest, authentic, vulnerable, and intimate with other people in a fearless way, and how beautiful that is. The second thing I learned was compassion. Like, I don't think I had ever truly tried to stand in somebody else's shoes. And in that setting, when I could hear all the pain that everybody was going through, it helped me not judge other people or judge myself as much.
Mhm.
So I would say what I left from that was learn to be more fearlessly honest with other people and open, and more compassion for other people.
Do you think, John, that this sense of awakening that you had from this retreat in California, did that make you realize what went wrong in your marriage? You feel that, oh, maybe I was not genuine with my wife, or I was
Yeah.
not vulnerable with her, I was not this and that. So did it kind of bring you some sense of telling yourself that maybe I contributed to the demise of the marriage?
Yeah, I think that came a lot later. Like, it took a long, you don't, it took me a long time to learn to be honest, open, vulnerable, intimate. I wasn't mature enough at the time to really do it. So
Okay.
it was years later, looking back, I went, wow, if I'd had the tools I have now, then things probably would have turned out differently. But for me, initially, what it did was I didn't stay mad at her. That's the best way I can put it.
Okay.
But yeah, later looking back, there's no doubt. I've talked to a lot of people since then. It's just like, wow, it's an amazing thing when a man actually learns to listen.
Oh, yeah. Oh my God. You know, 90% of all the why people come to see me for marriage counseling is because they just don't know how to listen.
Yeah.
And you know, they teach you a lot about reflective listening or active listening, but now there's what we call emotional listening. It's really being aware about how the other person is feeling, not the word that comes out of their mouth. So it's really important to really observe, not just listen or look, but just really pay attention to their body language and so on and so forth. And people will start realizing a lot more than just the word that comes from someone's mouth. Now, when it comes to the perception of death, okay, you were talking about the fear of death. Did this retreat kind of give you a different perspective?
Well, not initially, no, but literally 3 years later, I joined that same retreat leader. His name, by the way, was Brew Joy, Dr. William Brew Joy. He went by his middle name. He was very popular in the 70s, 80s, and 90s, wrote a best-selling book. He's very popular, brilliant medical doctor turned spiritual teacher. And so 3 years later, I signed up for, he had created a year-round spiritual study group where we met together in person in Tucson, Arizona for 3 or 4 days at a time. And then we had weekly online exercises and things like that. And I remember it like it was yesterday. The month of November rolled around and he says, okay, for the month of November, we're going to explore and embrace the mystery of death. And he goes, on a practical level, if you need to make a will, go make a will. If there's something that needs to be said before you die, like you need to make amends with somebody or some other people, go do it. Prepare yourself as if you're going to die at the end of this month. Then I want you to meditate on death, pray on death, listen to music on death, read books on death. And, you know, the very thing that I think most people don't do, I think most people, myself included, would push death as far away as possible, try not to think about it. He was having us do the exact opposite. And I will never forget it because it taught me so much about how, you know, it sounds cliche to sort of say, well, you need to face your fears, but it's true, you know, and there's immense gold in turning around and facing the very thing that you're running from. And so what I had was profound experiences in meditation where it felt like beings or guides were so loving. And there was like, first, John, before we teach you about death, first we have to teach you about life. And I had this profound, you know, dream visionary experience showing, you know, that we have our human self, we'll call it the body, and the identity, the ego, but then there's our divinity, which is immortal and shows up in lifetime after lifetime. And then in the next dream, I saw like how one actually dies and where one actually goes, at least in my case, after we die. And you know, with that, I wrote some chapters in my book about it. I wrote 2 chapters called Embracing Death, Part 1 and Part 2. And in the second one, I was no longer afraid of death. I was like, it makes total sense. And I'll share with you what it was presented to me is that after the body dies, I, as divinity, you might say, or as a soul, join many other souls. And it's kind of hard to describe, but it's like we are still individuals, but we're all connected at the same time. And, you know, some people have shown pictures of grids of light all around planet Earth. And I saw that same thing, but the grids were composed of actual beings. If you could think, you know, skydivers, sometimes when they jump out of a plane in a group, they hold onto each other's wrists and ankles. So what I saw was millions of people in a grid around Earth. And so this grid holds what I would call love and wisdom. And so when I die, I return to that source that's composed of many other souls plus me of love and wisdom. And at some point, I may choose to leave that again and be embodied as a human again. And so it was so profound and so unexpected because I didn't really know what to expect, that I took it to be true. And I may have other things I trip over still, Dan, but death is not one of them. And I loved that. I still tell people all the time, if you're terrified of something, turn around and face it. There's some real gold there.
So, do you believe in reincarnation, John?
Absolutely.
So, I mean, as you said, when the physical body dies, consciousness remains. So, do
Yep.
you feel that this consciousness, when it reincarnates, do you think that they keep that information with them into the new body, or it just goes to a fresh new slate?
Well, here's my understanding. There really are on this planet today what I would call a young soul, a middle-aged soul, and an old soul. And an old soul is somebody that has reincarnated over and over and over again and does carry the memories with them from lifetime to lifetime. Now, the way I've heard it described to me, and I believe to be true, is usually we don't come into this incarnation awake, but there are some people that do. From the minute they're born, they have full conscious recollection of all their past lives, everything. For most people, you might say we go to sleep, and then later in life we begin to wake up, and that waking up feels like a remembering. And so I heard somebody say once, we come into lifetime with only two things: our karma, which is like our unfinished lessons, and our wisdom. But most people don't have a full conscious recollection of past lives. So that's my understanding. In the biggest picture of all, it's probably just all God.
So do you
Yeah.
think like those who meditate can bring back this memory, can bring back this so-called reboot of the brain that was left from
Yeah.
a previous life and brought into a new one? Because this, you said new souls, middle age, and old souls.
Yeah.
The new souls are fresh reincarnation. I mean, there's no reincarnation. This is basically a new soul. But those in the middle age, where do they go in between those two? How do they describe the middle age soul?
Well, so the soul grows through experience. And
Mhm.
so you could think of it in the context of a single lifetime. Somebody who's 40 has more life experience than somebody who's 5, usually. Somebody who's 80 has had more life experience than somebody who's 5 or 40.
Correct.
So, and so you might think of it as the middle-aged soul has not accumulated as much wisdom as the old soul, simply because they haven't had as many reincarnations, as many lifetimes. And so, and there are people on this planet today that are what you might call an ancient soul. They've had many embodied existences, and sometimes in places not just on Earth as a human being, but in other places as well. And so, this, what I would call wisdom or mastery, sort of carries over from lifetime to lifetime. But again, sometimes for a period of time, people are asleep and they have to sort of remember or wake up. You know, Edgar Cayce was a really popular psychic and wrote a lot of well, there's a lot of amazing books written about Edgar Cayce. And Edgar could go into a trance and he would do readings on people, and they were usually of a medical nature, usually people that doctors couldn't treat at the time and had given up. Edgar Cayce would, with perfect clarity, whatever would come through him, would see the body and say, we have the body in front of us, and would make a perfect diagnosis and a perfect treatment plan. And because at a deeper level, whatever it was that worked through Edgar Cayce could see more than a typical doctor could see. So nowadays we might call those people medical intuitives.
Yes.
And but what Edgar drew on, because Edgar did talk about past lives, and typically sometimes he would have people that had really difficult issues, and he would say, look, in your last 3 lifetimes you struggled with this, you're trying to complete it in this lifetime. And and people would ask him, where do you get your information? And he would say, I get it from the Akashic records. In other traditions they might call it the book of life, but there is a place, you might say, in consciousness where every thought, every deed, everything you've ever done throughout time is recorded. And some people can access that. It's sometimes as simple as just asking, I want to read my Akashic records. I want to go through the book of life. And so, you know, you see psychics that just have amazing abilities, but they'll tell you, I'm just reading the Akashic records.
So, I mean, I studied metaphysics and I studied the Akashic records as well.
Yeah.
So, do you think, John, that those who reincarnate come back to Earth because of unfinished mission? Do you feel that from their previous life they were not able to accomplish the purpose as to why they were put on Earth? Is that a reason to look at reincarnation?
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. But I'm not really sure it's that I was put on earth. I think there's an I that says, I want to go learn this. I want to learn being the villain. I want to learn being the hero. And you're right. Sometimes before the lesson is fully learned and embodied, a person might die and they come back again and again. And so, a lot of people say Earth is a place where beings go to have many different experiences and can learn many different things and can master many different things. Who knows? Maybe you and I may have to come back 3 more times to really get this listening thing down pat.
Yeah. That is so true. I mean,
Yeah.
I love that passion, but now that you see or that you perceive death differently, are you accepting of it more? Because just recently I came across an interview with Larry King, and Neil deGrasse Tyson, the astrophysicist,
Mm-hmm.
and he asked Larry King, if you had your choice to become immortal, would you take it? And Larry said, well, yeah. And then Neil said, why? I said, well, because at least I'll be able to continue doing my TV show and help people grow and help people get informed. So that's maybe my mission. But then Neil came back by saying, if someone would ask me that question, I would say no.